Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. More now on the Attorney General's threat to cancel his appearance before the House Judiciary Committee, all because he and the Democratic chairman disagree over who should be asking the questions. Joining me now, former U.S. Attorney and University of Alabama law professor Joyce Vance, and former Justice Department spokesperson and an MSNBC analyst, Matt Twitter, and New York Times political reporter Ken Vogel. Ken, quick side note, I want to say good morning to your mother-in-law, who I learned over the weekend is one of our biggest fans. Matt, to you first. You called it weak for Barr to refuse to answer questions from counsel. Why would that be a red line for him? I think back to just a few months ago, Christine Blasey Ford, a private citizen, was willing to sit and take questions from an attorney.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, everyone in the Republican Party thought that was a great idea then. Look, I think, first of all, kudos to the House Judiciary Committee for addressing what has long been kind of a glaring structural weakness with Congress. We've all watched these committees. We know that members of Congress, with some notable exceptions, often don't ask the right questions. They're not prepared enough to ask follow-up questions when an experienced witness comes up and either filibusters or dodges, as I think the Attorney General will do. And so they've tried to address that by having staff ask questions. I think that would accrue to the benefit of both parties when it comes to future congressional oversight. Look, the Attorney General is a highly experienced, a highly accomplished attorney. This is his second time as Attorney General. He was the head of the Office of Legal Counsel, kind of one of the most weighty offices inside the Justice Department. He was the general counsel of a major corporation for over 10 years. He ought to be able to come up and answer questions from anyone, especially if he is proud of his actions over the last few weeks. And I think for him to dodge it, members, it is the committees themselves that set the rules for how they will question witnesses, not the witnesses. And so I think the Attorney General needs to be there on Thursday. He needs to ask questions from whoever asks him. And if he doesn't have anything to hide, he shouldn't have anything to worry about.
Joyce, give me a history lesson here. I would have thought Christine Blasey Ford was precedent of having committee counsel ask questions, but Republicans say there is none.
I think she is the precedent, and this is a private citizen, as you pointed out, Stephanie, who sat for this grilling by counsel, not simply questioning by committee members. She did it in a forthright fashion. I think it's difficult to understand how the Attorney General of the United States can testify to the American people with any less honesty and forthrightness and less to hide than a private citizen can. If we look a little bit further back, we all remember the spectacle of Hillary Clinton for 11 hours answering questions about Benghazi. But apparently the current Attorney General can't face Congress, can't face a series of questions for even 30 minutes.
Okay, Ken, let's get serious about what's actually going to happen here, because if Barr refuses to appear, doesn't this fit basically the pattern we've seen from administration officials that are basically refusing to cooperate with Congress? New York Times Ed Ward says it's, quote, the Trump administration effectively declaring lawmakers powerless over him. I mean, subpoena, deadline. The Trump White House blows their nose with these subpoenas.
Yeah, that's right, and we've seen sort of a clash set up here. We knew this was going to happen when Democrats took the House to some extent. We just didn't know how aggressive the Trump administration was going to be in trying to stiff-arm congressional oversight. Now we see sort of this is really the first flashpoint where we'll get some sort of clarity into how far the Trump administration is willing to go. It's also so telling here. I mean, Jeff Bennett, in your prior segment, alluded to this. He talked about the dirty little secret of Capitol Hill. And I think for us and for most viewers sitting at home watching this congressional testimony kind of become frustrated with the questioning. And you're thinking, well, why wouldn't they ask about this? Or why wouldn't they follow up what had seemed to be a very good question from a prior member of Congress? Well, the congressional staff are the ones who do the heavy lifting on this. And there is precedent for them asking questions of witnesses, maybe not of cabinet secretaries, but certainly of other witnesses. We saw this in the Intelligence Committee's investigations of Russia, that in closed testimony, there were staff participating in the questioning, and they did a very good job. When you read the transcripts, much different than the members of Congress who appear at times to be more just using the testimony, using the hearings as an opportunity to grandstand.
Okay, Matt, then if subpoenas are the way Jerry Nadler has to go, doesn't that again play to Trump's hand where he's just going to run the clock? Subpoenas don't mean you show up tomorrow.
Yeah, it certainly does. That's the advantage the administration has. If you were willing to be completely shameless, if you're not worried about the political consequences of stonewalling, which is the incentive, in addition to just respect
what
for
are the
separation
political
of powers.
consequences?
Well, that's the point. If you're not worried about them, if you're not worried about looking like you have something to hide, you can run this out forever. And they clearly aren't worried about it. They've made the calculation that the political consequences of stonewalling are less than the political consequences of showing up and having to answer difficult questions or turning over documents that might expose wrongdoing. So what has to happen is certainly they can run the clock. The question is, how long can they run the clock? I think Congress, the administration is running a little risk by stonewalling on every front, that the courts are going to get fed up. And when the Judiciary Committee goes to court and other committees go to court, when the House goes to court to try to enforce subpoenas, that the courts say, you know what, we're not going to drag this out the way we usually do. We're going to force you to start complying immediately. That's the risk I think the administration is running, and you may see kind of a shortened time frame in courts stepping in and siding with the House.
Joyce, do you agree with that? I mean, this thing could make its way to the Supreme Court. Would that be an advantage or a disadvantage for the president? I'm pretty sure he's keen on who's sitting on that court.
Well, the president's keen on who's sitting on the court, but federal judges across the country have shown remarkable independence. And it doesn't really matter who appointed the judge. Judges who believe, who sort of soaked up that 12th grade civics lesson about 3 different branches of government and checks and balances still believe in that, regardless of who's president. And I think Matt makes a great point about timing. As the administration tries to run the clock past the 2020 election, it may just be that they're targeting themselves for some of the most damaging information to become public during the home run space in that election, in that campaign. And it could be that we're seeing a summer of 2020 where information begins to become public and Trump has to take those hits that he's tried to avoid.
All right, I need to change the subject and Ken, speak to you on another story, one I cannot get enough of. A Russian company run by Oleg Deripaska had been under sanction until earlier this year, is suddenly investing about $200 million in Kentucky, home of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Help us understand what's going on here, because again, Oleg Deripaska, Russian oligarch who Paul Manafort was in the hole $19 million to when he joined the Trump administration. And December 23rd, just before everybody went on vacation, Steve Mnuchin snuck it right under the wire to get sanctions lifted on Deripaska and his businesses.
Yeah, and this is a deal, this potential investment in Kentucky, that would not have been possible had sanctions been in place. So the lifting of sanctions allows for this potential investment to be made, and it certainly does, raise at least optics issues, given that Mitch McConnell was the one who really led the fight in the Senate to prevent Congress from blocking the lifting of the sanctions. There is some congressional review of sanctions, of this type of sanctions, and there was a surprising amount of Republican support for blocking the lifting of the sanctions, but Mitch McConnell stepped in and managed to rally just enough Republican opposition that these sanctions were lifted. And so the question that some Democrats are raising is this a payoff for Mitch McConnell, for the Trump administration, lifting these sanctions that Ruhle is then going to inject $200 million into Kentucky, into a project that would create a lot of jobs? The folks with the company say not at all. We didn't talk to Mitch McConnell or the Trump administration about this, but I think we're going to see some congressional scrutiny of this investment.
The optics don't look good, but guess what? In 2019, shame on you doesn't matter to a whole lot of people.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.